There is a state where a single dripping, open-faced burger drowned in green chili was supposedly named after the one word a hungry man muttered when he first looked down at his own plate. And that name stuck so completely that an entire regional dish now carries it without anyone in Colorado batting an eye. Colorado. Population 5.9 million. The Centennial State, split between the flat eastern plains and the Rocky Mountains that gave it its nickname, irrigated valleys carved out of what 19th century settlers initially wrote off as worthless desert. Colorado, where the soil said no and the farmers said otherwise. The western slope town of Palisade sits in country the Ute people had called home long before white settlers arrived in the 1880s, shortly after the Ute were forcibly removed from the Grand Valley. The land that greeted those early settlers looked, by most accounts, like a write-off. Dry, sagebrush-covered, sandstone desert with barely enough water to support more than scattered native vegetation. A farmer named J.P. Harlow decided to test it anyway. In 1882, he planted a large vegetable garden alongside a stand of fruit trees on his land near Rapid Creek, just east of Palisade. The vegetables did fine. The fruit trees died, almost all of them. Rather than give up, Harlow began experimenting with the soil itself, fertilizing it with burnt bone and leached ashes until his surviving trees finally took hold. By 1885, they were bearing fruit, and by 1896, his orchard had grown to more than 2,000 peach trees, in what may have been the first genuinely successful peach crop grown anywhere in Colorado. Harlow shared his techniques freely with other valley farmers, and orchards spread rapidly through the Grand Valley once a hand-dug irrigation system began pulling water from the Colorado and Gunnison rivers. The valley's specific geography turned out to be the real secret ingredient. Hot days build sugar in the developing fruit, and a nightly katabatic wind moving down off the Book Cliffs, locally nicknamed the $1,000,000 Wind, keeps spring nights just warm enough to spare the delicate buds from frost, while cold enough overnight to lock that built-up sweetness in. By the early 1900s, refrigerated railcars were shipping more than 25,000 pounds of peaches out of Palisade daily, and growers' cooperatives were eventually moving over 1,000 boxcars a year, each one packed with roughly 80,000 peaches. Palisade has hosted an annual peach festival since 1968, now drawing more than 15,000 visitors every August. Nobody knows exactly when chili peppers first arrived in the Arkansas River Valley around Pueblo. The most likely theory traces them to Mexican traders and settlers moving north as early as the 1840s. But generations of local cultivation and informal selective breeding eventually produced a distinct regional pepper, unlike the chilies grown anywhere else in the Southwest. The modern Pueblo chile owes its specific character to one farming family. Harry Moscow grew the local chili alongside his other crops for decades, and when he died in 1988, he left his seed stock to his nephew, Dr. Mike Bartolo, a vegetable crop specialist at Colorado State University's Arkansas Valley Research Center. While growing out that inherited seed, Bartolo noticed one plant that stood apart. Slightly bigger, with a noticeably thicker pod wall and pods that faced upward toward the sun, rather than hanging down the way most chili varieties grow. Years of careful selection from that single standout plant produced what's now called the Moscow chile, the variety that dominates Pueblo chili fields today, prized specifically because its thick walls hold up to roasting without collapsing into mush the way thinner-walled peppers do. Every September, the Pueblo Chile and Frijoles Festival draws more than 140,000 visitors over 3 days, with iron cages spinning bushels of chilies over open flame across more than 10 city blocks of downtown. The chili shows up in nearly everything locally: stews, beer, ice cream, and, most famously, the slopper, an open-faced cheeseburger smothered in Pueblo green chile, invented at Gray's Coors Tavern sometime in the 1950s. In the Arkansas Valley of southeastern Colorado, a man named George Swink began experimenting with melon cultivation in the late 1870s, eventually discovering that the valley's specific combination of soil and climate produced cantaloupes with measurably higher natural sugar content than melons grown almost anywhere else in the country. In 1878, Swink and roughly 24 friends and neighbors decided the local melon harvest deserved a celebration of its own, founding what became Watermelon Day. The tradition never stopped. Today, it anchors the Arkansas Valley Fair, drawing more than 12,000 attendees for seed-spitting contests, melon carving competitions, and the legendary watermelon pile, where an estimated 50,000 pounds of free watermelon get given away to anyone who shows up. Rocky Ford cantaloupes carry roughly 5% more natural sugar than cantaloupes grown in other regions, according to local agricultural researchers, a difference attributed to the valley's intense sun and mineral-rich soil. The same Colorado-specific growing conditions that built the Palisade peach industry 40 miles or so to the west. In the Uncompahgre Valley of western Colorado, the town of Olathe sits ringed by the San Juan Mountains in a microclimate that local farmers and chefs widely credit with producing some of the sweetest corn grown anywhere in the country. Olathe sweet corn is a bicolor variety, kernels speckled yellow and white on the same ear, harvested through a short window from July into August. The corn's reputation has grown specific enough that Colorado restaurants list Olathe sweet corn by name on seasonal menus, treating it less as a generic vegetable than as an identifiable sourced ingredient the way other regions might name-check a specific cattle ranch or fishery. The Olathe Sweet Corn Festival celebrates the harvest every summer, drawing visitors from across the western slope specifically for corn that locals insist genuinely tastes different from anything sold elsewhere. Colorado lamb occupies a strange position in American food culture. Internationally respected by chefs, frequently featured on high-end restaurant menus from coast to coast, and still, within the American West itself, something of an acquired taste rather than an everyday staple. Colorado's lamb industry developed around mountain and high plains, grazing land bred specifically for meat quality rather than wool production, raised without artificial growth hormones. The resulting meat carries a flavor and tenderness that's made it a favorite among chefs internationally, even in cuisines, Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, broader European cooking, where lamb already occupies a daily, central role rather than an occasional indulgence. Colorado's high-altitude grazing conditions, similar in principle to the climate logic behind Palisades peaches and Pueblo's chilies, are generally credited with the meat's specific quality. The Denver omelet, eggs folded around diced ham, onion, green pepper, and cheese, sometimes mushrooms, carries one of the more genuinely disputed origin stories on this list, with the most persistent explanation tracing it to railroad-era short-order cooks, reportedly Chinese immigrant cooks working Western rail lines, adapting something resembling egg foo, young to ingredients and tastes more familiar to American railroad crews and travelers passing through. Regardless of the exact mechanism, the dish became so closely associated with Denver and the broader Rocky Mountain region that it carries the city's name on diner menus nationwide. One of relatively few American cities to lend its name directly to a globally recognized breakfast dish. In Colorado itself, a proper Denver omelet gets the regional treatment, smothered in green chile, ideally Pueblos, turning a nationally exported breakfast staple back into something distinctly local. Distinct from the chili served as a topping or side condiment, Colorado-style green chili as a stew is its own substantial dish. Green chilies, tomatillos, and pork simmered together for hours until the pork falls apart and the liquid reduces into something thick enough to eat with a spoon rather than drink from a bowl. The stew sometimes turns out brown rather than vibrantly green, a detail that occasionally alarms first-time diners, but results simply from how the chilies were roasted beforehand rather than any flaw in preparation. It's a genuine cold-weather dish, built for Colorado's sharp temperature swings between hot days and cold mountain nights, and it appears on menus throughout the southern part of the state with the same regional pride that drives the Pueblo Chile Festival each September. Colorado's brewing culture runs deep enough that the state consistently ranks among the top craft beer-producing regions in the country, anchored by towns like Fort Collins and Denver, where breweries cluster densely enough to support dedicated beer tourism routes. The state's brewing identity draws on the same agricultural abundance that built its produce reputation, access to clean mountain water, and a brewing culture that took root early enough to become genuinely foundational to local identity, rather than arriving as a recent trend the way craft beer scenes did in some other American cities. Colorado breweries frequently lean into the state's chili culture directly, producing green chili beers as a seasonal specialty tied to harvest season, treating Pueblo's signature pepper as fair game for an entirely different category of local product. Colorado's relationship with bison runs through the same plains ecosystem that once supported tens of millions of the animals before 19th-century commercial hunting and deliberate government policy reduced the population to a few hundred. Colorado now sits among the states actively rebuilding commercial bison ranching, with the meat appearing on menus throughout the Front Range and mountain towns as a leaner, distinctly flavored alternative to beef. Elk, venison, and other Rocky Mountain game meats occupy a similar niche, drawing on the state's hunting culture and high-altitude ranges to supply a meat tradition that runs parallel to, rather than competing directly with, the state's more conventional beef and lamb industries. Colorado's signature foods all share one quiet, stubborn origin story. Someone looked at land that appeared genuinely unsuited to growing anything worthwhile, and decided to prove that assessment wrong through sheer agricultural persistence. J.P. Harlow watched his first orchard die almost entirely and kept experimenting with the soil until his trees finally took. The Moscow chili exists because one farmer's nephew noticed a single plant standing slightly apart from thousands of others and spent years selecting from it. George Swink and 24 friends decided their melons deserved their own holiday in 1878, and nobody since has found a reason to stop celebrating it. None of these were inevitable successes. Each required someone refusing to accept what the land seemed to be telling them. Not every state's signature fruit required hand-digging an irrigation canal just to keep the trees alive long enough to bear fruit. Not every state's defining regional burger gets its name from a customer's blunt assessment of what landed on his own plate. Not every state can trace its most prized chili pepper back to one specific plant. A single farmer happened to notice looked just a little different from the rest.